Welcome to our latest edition of Charity Chats. I'm joined by my normal compadres. We've got Catherine Ross-Jomji, who is charity partner at Shakespeare Martineau, and James Saunders, who's a charity partner at Moore Kingston Smith. Welcome, guys. Hope you're both well. Excellent. Well, having thought we were going to have a fairly quiet August, we seem to have had quite a busy August, and there are at least 4 things that have caught my eye. So I thought we'd start off with CC14 and the revised guidance. I don't know if you guys have had a look at it, whether you've got any views, whether you've seen any interesting comment in the press.
I mean, I think it's interesting guidance. I think the Charity Commission had said they wanted to update it. They've updated it. It's an update. You know, they got rid of all the complicated terminology that they had in their previous editions of program related, mission related, mixed motive that confused everybody, which I thought was pretty obvious that it would confuse everybody. So now they've said, yeah, okay, let's take that away. I don't think it's life changing. I haven't felt the need to rip up previous, history novels and say, oh, now everything's changed. I think it's just tried to clarify. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's probably more for actually the two of you rather than me. But it seems reasonably sensible, clearing up what some of the previous years' worth of cases brought up. Really.
Yeah, I have to say, having read through, I think they've done a really good job actually putting it into plain English and simplifying it, and also shortening it, so it is a slightly easier read. The one thing, I think on the first page, they're very clear about, your obligations as trustees, making sure you are acting in the best interest of the charity and not bringing your personal affairs into it. The one thing that does come through is around reputational risk, which I do think is a new addition to it. I know they simplify the language. And the bit there I just slightly worry is people jumping on the bandwagon saying charities you must do, where fundamentally, actually, no, they should act in the best interest of their charity, and only if it's aligned should they. So I think that's a thing. And there were 1 or 2 commentators I noticed who were sort of saying that Butler Schloss have made massive changes to it. I think all the Butler Schloss case, I don't know about you, Catherine, just really reiterated the Bishop of Oxford case, which if anybody goes back and reads it, I think that makes complete sense.
Your point, Charles, about reputational risk is an interesting one, because that then brings in that subjectivity again, doesn't it? Which is always the danger in this sort of guidance is you must do that, you can do that, you should do that. But when it's reputational, that's in the eye of the reviewer, isn't it? It's down to the opinion of that person making, or different people making that call.
Yeah. And I also thought that point of interpretation lent itself to, is it the Lankelly Chase charity, where I couldn't square that in my mind. I don't know the detail behind it, but that they had effectively said, well, we're just going to wind ourselves up because we can't square the kind of our objects as the charity and what we do with our investments. But it did seem to me as though they were just moving away from being able to influence at all, that you've just said, well, that's somebody else's problem, then
yes, we
leave.
And there was something about colonialism in that as well, wasn't it, with the Lankelly Chase? And I didn't really get that, because I thought the charities, the 2 charities had been set up in the, was it 40s, 50s and 60s? Anyway, yes. I again started to have a look at it and didn't really get to the bottom of understanding why it was originally set up, or why they were originally set up, and why this was such a conflict. Yeah. So anyway, a big tick to the Charity Commission on that one. The other thing that I picked up on, charities investigating over the use of signed blank cheques. So this is 2 educational charities that are based in Israel, where you've got trustees both in the UK and in Israel. And obviously, I think the trustees in Israel was using blank cheques that have been pre-signed. I have to say, I can't remember the last time I actually even signed a cheque. But actually, I think more interestingly was the Commission's comments around operating heavily in cash. I don't know, James, if you've got a view on that, whether you saw.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this before. As an auditor, it's an absolute nightmare when people work in cash, but sometimes they have to. These trustees that operate in war-torn or poverty-stricken areas, where cash is king, well, they need this cash to be able to do their work. The trick is, and the difficulty is, firstly, keeping it secure, and secondly, keeping the trail clear, so that you obviously you're not putting your representatives at risk of being mugged or the cash being stolen or corrupt, or getting into corrupt hands. And you've got to make sure that the money is spent on charitable objectives, where obviously the audit trail, from my side, the audit trail has to be complete. So the difficulty is tracking it and keeping it safe. You know, you can't just bar cash because it's not particularly easy to track, or you know, that's the reality of it. You've got to have the controls. It's all about having the controls and the processes in place to protect your representatives and the money trail as much as possible, really.
Yeah, and I think the headline, you can get a bit smug and think, well, obviously you shouldn't have pre-signed checks. But I think you assume, well, that's the place down the road where they've got some in a drawer and they're just operating in the UK. Whereas I think when you operate internationally and places where there is not a cash point or there is not a banking facility you can go to, then I think it's the circumstances that made this different, whereas the headline made it look like it was quite a simple mistake, whereas I think it's more complex.
Yeah, I mean, again, the issue with blank checks, obviously, is that someone can just write a blank check to themselves. It's not that that necessarily they can be, you know, stolen and used. It's more that someone can, you know, just write themselves a check for however much. If you've got the trust there and you recognise the risk is there and you have some way of mitigating it, controlling it, you know, as long as you know that's the risk, then you can go somewhere. The danger is, excuse me, the danger is where there's, you know, the trustees, for example, didn't know that the chief executive had, as you described, Catherine, written, you know, signed blank checks, and the FD was sitting down the corridor, and that's where the risk is involved. It's the lack of knowledge and the lack of control, if you like, rather than, in this case, it's a way of getting round not being able to pay people.
Yeah, I suppose the bit that doesn't come out of the commentary here, only because they've opened the investigation, is Israel to us is a relatively sophisticated country. So, you know, why are they using the blank check bit? I get. I mean, you know, we would have all seen when we first entered the world of charities, that was a fairly normal practice 20-30 years ago. And I think has largely been stamped out because of where banking has changed. But the use of cash, I think, is really quite problematic for charities that are operating outside the UK. You know, I had one experience with refugees in Calais, where, you know, you were trying to pay for haircuts and sanitary stuff and everything else, and the only way you could do that was currency and cash, and so we had to take the euros across the channel and distribute it. And as trustees, obviously, we were trying to work out how best to make sure that the money was going to where it was intended, but you're dealing with relatively small amounts, and, you know, does become sort of sledgehammer cracking a nut, because you're actually giving out relatively small amounts of money, you know, whether it's 10 or 20 quid or whatever it may be. So yeah, I think a big challenge.
You're not coming back with a load of receipts either, Charles, are you?
No. I'm sure they'd be very happy to write on a piece of paper they've received it, but it's not, it doesn't do it. So the other thing that caught my attention is Captain Tom's daughter's firm paid thousands for charity award judging. It was an investigation by BBC Newsnight uncovering Ingram Moore, had received a significant appearance fee. Catherine, what do you think of that?
I mean, we just keep getting more and more and more of these stories as well, don't we, about this particular charity? And I think some of the stories are written with the implication that the millions that the public donated has somehow gone missing, which it hasn't. That all went to NHS charities. That's all fine. This is the new charity that was then set up. And I don't know if it was naivety. I don't know if it was rushed. I don't know if they were badly advised, but they are getting it wrong, it would seem, on, you know, reputational risk for the charity, managing conflicts of interest, acting in the charity's best interests. All of these points, I don't think it's helpful that we're necessarily getting these drip feed stories. The Charity Commission are investigating. It looks like there's quite a lot for them to look at, but I'm sort of more interested to see what sense can be made of the whole thing, to see what the Charity Commission make of it, rather than trying to understand what journalists have or haven't found.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate, isn't it? There's this dichotomy between this amazing thing that Tom Moore did, and this really scruffy, horrible activities that seem to be going on after with the charity that's been formed. It's really unfortunate. It doesn't. It's a really. It sets the charity sector, I think, in a pretty bad light when, you know, these are the stories that are being reported. And it looks like it's some pretty scabby stuff going on, really, and just goes against everything that charity is designed for. This whole thing about the spa being built, and, you know, and a planning permission not, and then all the everything else, the appearance money, all that sort of stuff. It's just you know, it's not very nice.
But I mean, you know, it is such a rarity. I suppose that's why it's news. So in that respect, you know, we should look at it in a proportion. This is really, really, really unusual. And as Catherine, you say, I think it'll be interesting to see, you know, when somebody goes back and looks at the whole thing, actually seeing the full story and what was the motivation behind it.
Yeah, you hope, Charles, that it's the exception that proves the general rule that the charity sector is very, you know, knows what it's doing. Generally, people in it know that they should be acting for their charities, not in self-interest.
But we come across people working in the charity sector. We're trustees ourselves. You know, I certainly my experience over the last 30 years is that 99.999% of the people who are participating in charities are passionate about what they're doing and want to do the right thing to their best of ability. And you know, there are very few bad apples in that barrel, and when it is identified, I think the sector's very good at actually identifying it and then doing something about it.
Yeah, and those people are often scrupulous in making sure that money is well spent, and that they aren't even, you know, there's no even suggestion of them personally benefiting from this sort of activity.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose the other report that was quite interesting was around Jim Radcliffe Foundation, and the commission. I don't know if you guys have got a view on that, which is this sort of setting up of an exclusive members club known as the Courchevel Ski Club, and there was obviously a charitable element of that. Catherine,
well, interestingly, with this one, I mean, I think the Charity Commission cleared it up, cleared the charity in effect. I mean, as I understand it, through, you know, one of its objectives was promoting amateur sport. So presumably that is the element that is catching what their activities are. Their activities. I mean, I have to say, I don't know the ins and outs of it. I mean, the reporting is the exclusive members club. Who knows whether that is strictly accurate or not? It could have been something completely different, but the amateur sport thing, I think, is probably the bit that catches it. But I mean, Catherine, it's an interesting one comparing that with newly set up charities, isn't it? And
it is.
Around that.
It is, and also just the point of, if I had a client saying to me, so we're thinking of giving £13 million as a grant to build a ski chalet in Switzerland or France or wherever, I think I'd normally be saying, well, let's just think about this for a second. Do we really think that's a good idea? How is this going to play out? Because I think it played out exactly how you would expect it to. But the bit I took most issue with was a kind of techie point, because that's what crosses my desk, of all of the trustees, I think, worked for Sir Jim Ratcliffe companies. And if you were setting up a new charity where all of the trustees came from the founder company, it wouldn't be permitted. It would be said, you know, you're not managing conflicts of interest. And actually, it wasn't even a requirement. It was a recommendation that they should appoint one trustee who doesn't work for the companies. And even clients will say to me, well, what difference would that make? You couldn't have a quorum meeting with one person. So it's not managing a conflict of interest, not really doing anything. So again, I just thought, oh, don't play into the charities are throwing money around the world and doing wasteful things with it. And also, I think, not managing conflicts of interest when other charities very much are.
Well, the Child Trust Fund had that problem, didn't it, with the husband and wife, and then I can't remember who the third trustee was, but he was left in a very difficult position when they got divorced and then tried to split the charity, and it all became very complex.
The Letimaki, I think he was a friend of the couple, so I think, oh my God, when they then divorce, who you're gonna, side with, but yes.
And he was having to effectively defend it or take it to court or to challenge the judgment. I mean, the whole thing was, I'm not a lawyer, so I didn't get my head around it.
Yeah, awkward, I think, is the terminology.
I think that's right. And then the final thing that that I saw, which I have to say is definitely a summer silly. Well, I thought it was summer silly. Is a campaign urges dictionaries to recognise philanthropy as a word. So this is a campaign put on by Remember a Charity, which is an association of almost 200 charities. In which it was aimed to dispel the notion that people must be wealthy to leave a financial gift to a charity in their will. I don't know if you guys have got a view on it.
I think silence speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Well, I can tell you, being dyslexic,
so
philanthropy is just going to be a word I'm really going to struggle with.
Yeah. I don't even know if they'd have done that thing where you get a small group of people and say, what do you think of this word? Do you like it? Don't even think they've done that. And I think, oh, it just sounds like nonsense. And I also think it's quite patronizing. I think more people do understand about charitable giving. So let's not pretend they're idiots and say, oh, actually do not realize they do it. So, yeah.
I mean, all well and good for, I think, any opportunity to remind people that when they're making their wills, there's an opportunity to do something that they can feel passionate about and that it will make a difference going forward. But yes, coming up with a word, I suppose, well, it's got our attention at least for 30 seconds, even if we might have forgotten it by tomorrow. Well, I think that's probably all we've got time for today. Thank you both, Catherine and James. I think it's been a good conversation. And we will carry on looking out for interesting topics.